zone.
All right, so one of our... Oh, man, the man anymore. I mean, I called him.
Right. Yeah. Have it in printed out too. Here. Paying attention. I brought your own. Put them out.
Yeah,
I know you already have your own. You have color versions.
Prepared. Well, yeah.
Yes. In case we have others, I brought a sign-in sheet. People decide to come see us.
Architecture.
Abandoned me. Trip over cords, whatever. Yeah.
Later.
Yeah, you got Mike.
Oh, hi. I'm Cynthia Elmore, Preservation Officer. Good to meet you, Mike.
Okay.
Thanks for coming up today. How exciting.
I get it. I totally get it. Thank you so much.
No problem, but if you need to...
Okay.
I'm switching. Hopefully.
Let's go.
No. I brought it over here. It was when I got there, so.
What?
9 minutes. There he is.
Oh, yeah.
Jay,
How's it going?
Hey,
how are you doing?
we got like two quasi friends messages. You are gay, right?
Actually,
See, Cynthia is used to that.
Yeah, I was like,
Because I'm usually like on the net.
Actually, I'm going to put Jay closer to the speaker.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
You're right by the speaker.
Yeah.
On the dangerous side of the cord.
Lori's coming too.
Oh, good. Okay. So show.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In the one there.
Go presenting then? Is it?
I'm presenting.
Okay.
But she's
gonna be
she's
here.
here. She may chime in.
Cool.
She's looking for a parking spot.
Oh, good. Okay. Please, you'll find more.
I took the last one on.
Oh. Doggy dog out there.
It is surprisingly for, almost 30.
Yeah, afternoon, I know.
There'll be a few more around.
So I think it's all set.
In the mornings, that's dog eat dog.
Yeah.
You haven't
Exactly.
Fighting for spots.
Yeah.
Now, is Shots going to come and present? Do we
He's on the agenda, but I'm not sure if he was dialing in or not.
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
may know that.
Oh, he may be down.
Is
Shots coming down, or is he coming?
I think he's
calling in. He was in the
Oh, yeah.
field, so I've had a lot of back and forth with him and Ann.
They got the contact info?
Yes, I sent them the contact last night.
So I was like, oh, I don't think you can.
And do note, we are recording the presentation, both on screen and audio. We are actively recording.
Yeah.
Unless you want to mute that.
Yeah,
thing,
we'll
you can mute it.
Hello? Okay.
So, sorry, just to let everybody know, we had you guys on mute, just, we're getting assembled here in the conference room. We'll start in just a few minutes, but wanted to let everybody know that we are here.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, conference room can keep talking.
Green. It gets quiet again.
The bells are tolling, that it is, the bells here in the cathedral across the street are tolling, so exactly.
Always sounds
So,
dramatic.
it is 3, we have, stepped out of the room for a minute, so we'll wait till she's back. She's coming. I think now there's silence. It's a big room. It's a big room for silence. There's Dina.
Hey, there you
go. Oh, look. Dina's calendar is popping up. She had a lot of meetings today.
Yeah, bigger pain.
Do you know
Where, my suggestion would be you get, but it's mine. Okay.
And do we want to pull up the agenda?
Pull up the agenda. Oh, yes, you can. We have an agenda right here as well.
Hey, Shannon and Dave, I think we may have jumped the gun early.
Good. Well, I'm sorry, we're still, we're doing a little technologying here.
I can see, I'm sitting getting ready to try to close out your email.
So for those of you that are not here in the Louisville Metro Conference Room with us, can you all see the screen? You should be able to see on the agenda for the meeting today. Are you able to do that?
Yep.
Great. All right.
Hi.
Yes, would you like to?
There you go.
I'm Sir Miller, and I'm a consultant working with Louisville Metro to facilitate this meeting and this process. But I will kick it now to Gina Dopp of Louisville Metro for a brief introduction and welcome this meeting.
Hi, everybody, near and far. I'm Gina Dunlap, Director of Redevelopment Strategies for Louisville. I am working almost singularly on things related to the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative and what we call Vision Russell. And so the Historic 106 review process is an important component of our ability to get the project started in earnest. So thank you for agreeing to be a consulting party and or a signatory. Thank you for your brain power, your input and consultation on this most important engagement. Today, we are going to be focused on the below-ground resources or the archaeological resources and aspects of the project. So here in the room with us, we have a really great group of experts on these types of matters. Later on this evening, we'll be diving into the architectural or above-ground resources, but we thought it would be prudent to maybe separate the conversations, one, because people are interested or more well-versed in one or the other, and we have a lot of discussion and topics to cover. So thank you for bearing with us, and if there's anything that comes up, I am new to running a WebEx webinar. There are chat features for those who are dialing in remotely, but you can certainly either try to type in your comment or just interject on the speakerphone. Maybe some other house rules to think about. We're going to try to avoid rattling our papers or typing too furiously so that we don't have that background noise over the phone. We are recording this entire meeting, both the audio and the visuals that you'll see on the screen, so that we can make those resources available to people at a later time, especially if they weren't able to participate. Any other things that we wanted to?
You cut housekeeping without being prompted. That was totally fabulous. I would say that for those of you that are on the phone, we will not have the chat feature up on the screen for most of the time. So if you have something to say, please say it. Please ask as we're going through. We will only have this one speakerphone here in the conference room. So for those of you at the far end of the table, if you have something to say, we'd ask you to either project or come on down here to this end of the table. I would also ask everybody that's here in the conference room to remember that we are trying to have a conversation with some people who might not be here. So we'll always give folks on the phone an opportunity to participate. So, I would like to take a roll call so that we know everybody that's here. So we'll go around the room first here in the Metro conference room, and then we'll engage with folks on the phone.
One more housekeeping suggestion. If you're dialing in remotely, you may want to put your phone on mute to avoid any of your background noise interfering with the call as well.
Great. So I am Cinder Miller. I'm with Gray and Pape, and I'm helping Metro with their Section 106 consultation process. Nick.
Hey, I'm Laura Quince. I'm the Site Protection Program Manager at the Kentucky SHPO.
So I'm the Archaeology Review Coordinator for the Kentucky Heritage Council.
I'm Jill. I'm the Environmental Review Coordinator at the Kentucky Heritage Council.
Archaeological Intern at KHC.
Min Edwards with Louisville Metro Housing Department.
Mark Bernard, Louisville Metro Housing Authority. Consultant arts.
Cynthia Moore, Historic Preservation Officer for Louisville Metro. Dahlgren, I am a consulting party for Ciopa.
Dotman, Ciopa as well.
Okay, and we'd like to ask the people on the phone to introduce yourselves.
Preservation Kentucky Consulting Party.
Advisory Council on Historic Preservation.
Chloe Louisville Metro Housing Authority.
As Assistant Director, Office of Archaeology.
Rachel Berryman, Clarence Salazar.
Thank Louisville Metro Housing Authority.
And Archaeology, David Schott.
Archaeology.
All right. Well, thank you for that roll call. And with that, we will proceed right into the PowerPoint.
What I'll do is just run through the agenda in one fell swoop, and then we'll dive right into the PowerPoint. But we'd like to talk about some the previous meetings and the timeline. Then we'll go into a review and recap of the Section 106 process, followed by a review of archaeological sites identified at Beecher, Terrace, then to a discussion on public outreach and how it relates to the archaeology that we're planning, meetings and communications, then Q&A for everyone. That'll get us through most of the meeting. We will do some conclusions and thank yous and hope to get out on time by 5 o'clock.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. So we'll go to the top, and, all right, we'll see if we, down.
Okay.
Do the keyboard.
Yeah.
Try the director. Fantastic. So this is a project overview slide. Do you want to take this one? I think you've touched on it.
Sure. So what you see in the circles, sort of the concept of our objectives for Vision Russell. It is a comprehensive undertaking looking to focus on increasing connectivity, both from a physical perspective with multimodal transportation, how we do our streetscapes, bike lane facilities, making it safe for pedestrians, as well as digital connectivity, so making sure that there's access to good internet and equipping people with tools to utilize that internet. We're also focused on creating retail and service centers, expanding recreational, educational, and cultural resources within the neighborhood boundaries, improving overall health, and of course preserving and developing housing. The leaves that you see on the right were part of a community engagement during the planning process where people told us what it is they wanted to see and what they hoped for with regard to the Just Neighborhoods Initiative. Otherwise, all of the staff, internal and external partners are grouped into 4 major categories. One group focusing on the people and thinking about workforce opportunities, individual development opportunities for all the people involved. It would include roughly 700 households from Beecher Terrace. Housing opportunities both within the Russell neighborhood or in opportunity areas elsewhere in Jefferson County, making sure that residents of Beecher have housing choices and that we're providing more housing choices within the neighborhood boundary. Educational attainment, Roosevelt Perry Elementary is our choice neighborhood school. So we're collaborating with Diane Porter and Jonathan Lowe that work, represent JCPS and make sure that, you know, we're, again, reinforcing the connectivity and that people get wraparound services in the neighborhood components. So that would include the greater Russell neighborhood, meaning things outside or beyond the footprint of Beecher Terrace.
Thank you. Have any questions for Gina about the overall project? Great. So I'm here to review the status, to review the first 2 consulting parties meetings, and then we'll talk a little bit about where this project exists in the Section 106 timeline. So the first consulting party meeting was held back in December, and it focused, actually I think it was the end of November. December 11th, there you go, corrected. And it focused strongly on what is the point of the consulting parties process. It walked through the Section 106 process in detail, introduced briefly the results of the identification surveys. We'll touch on that a little bit more as we go through here. As we go through this process, this consulting parties meeting was at the end of January, and that meeting focused more on the effects of the project on identified historic properties, and it introduced to all the consulting parties a top-line overview of mitigation options that the project was considering to mitigate adverse effects to historic properties. So I'm not going to go back through all of that content. All the content from both of those meetings is available on the Vision Russell website, and if anybody wants to review that, you're welcome to do so at any time. And if you have any questions about what happened at those 2 meetings, please let either Cynthia or I know, and we can catch you up a little bit. So we move forward here to talk about where the project is in the Section 106 consultation process. And I've showed this slide now at all the consulting parties meetings, so hopefully it's familiar. We have completed, obviously, step 1, the initiation of that consulting parties, the consultation. Consultation, as you see at the bottom, is something that will go on through the life of the entire project. There's a slide later about the timeline that shows consultation extending from the very beginning all the way to the very, very end of the construction of the last part of the project. And that is that is what we will do from here going forward, is continuous consultation. Did step 2 on this timeline, which talks about identification and evaluation of historic properties. There are both archaeological sites here, so below ground historic properties, as well as above ground resources, and again, we'll show what those are in just a minute. Step 3 is the assessment of the effects of the undertaking on those historic properties. We've determined that the project will have an adverse effect on historic properties. Very specifically, the Beecher Terrace complex will be torn down. There is a direct adverse effect as a result of that. There will be an adverse effect on both above and below ground resources. With regard to the very last step, the resolution of those adverse effects, Metro has already circulated a draft of a programmatic agreement that will be used to resolve those adverse effects. And the comment period on for the programmatic agreement ends next week. I think it's April 6th. I look forward to receiving comments back on that. I've received a few emails asking if we're going to talk a lot about the programmatic agreement today. There's a slide for it at the very end of this archaeology presentation, but it's way at the end. There will definitely be plenty of opportunity for conversation about the programmatic agreement in the second meeting tonight if we don't address questions that you might have about it in this meeting. But just wanted to let everybody know where we stand in the Section 106 process. Any questions about that? All right. To show a map of the area of potential effect for the project, this is an overview slide that shows the area of potential effect, so the area studied, the area that the project could affect historic properties in. The red rectangle is the area that we looked at for indirect effect, above ground resources. And the white rectangle, where the project will have a direct physical effect, is where we looked for direct effects, mostly for archaeological resources. You can see the resources identified mapped on this slide, and we'll make reference to these resources throughout this conversation today. We talked about this a little bit earlier. This is the slide that shows that the 106 compliance process and the different construction phases extend through the life of the project. In the programmatic agreement, we discuss a stage 1. I had a lot of questions. I've received already a lot of questions about stage 1 versus later phases. So we wanted to take a minute to be specific about what stage 1 is. Stage 1 is the known project as of January 1st, 2018. It's all the things that we know are going to happen now for the project. It includes phase 2 and 3 of demolition for the project, and we'll show that in a minute. It includes phase 2 and 3 of relocations associated with the project. It includes phases 1, 2, and 3 of the Section 106 process. Then, stage 1 includes just the first phase of construction for the project. Okay, and because of all the questions on the programmatic agreement, we will make sure to specify that language a little more clearly in the final programmatic agreement. But later, outside of stage 2, pretty much includes, so have ongoing consultation, so ongoing Section 106 process, and then phases 2 through beyond for construction. As a suggestion for the programmatic agreement, we will call this a multi-stage project as opposed to stating specifically how many construction phases there will be, so that we have the option of combining some of the later phases into a single resolution document. But that's pretty technical, but that's the way that we have established the project. There are deadlines that I'd like to convey right now, some other timeline elements that we would like to convey now. I mentioned the comment period for the draft programmatic agreement ends on April 8th. Hoping to circulate a final programmatic agreement for signatures out by April 30th, so have the programmatic agreement signed back by May 30th. That's target date for doing that. We wanted everybody know that so that they know that we'll have an aggressive schedule for addressing all of those comments from April 8th till the end of April. That will be a period of probably intense conversation about the programmatic agreement with anybody that has comments on that document. Of the first stage of construction, of the first stage of the project, we will have a letter of resolution that describes how we will resolve the adverse effects associated with that first stage. And we hope to have those letters of resolution finalized by June 15th. And there's a schedule that we'll put together a schedule that is for when we're going to be circulating out drafts of those letter of resolution mitigation plans. But basically, the idea is to circulate that first set of mitigation plans in mid-April, by April 15th, so that so that all the consulting parties can be looking at what those are. We have started talking about those, and there will be another meeting to address those. That's a lot of timelines for the project. Any questions or comments about that? Yep. Great. Stop listening to me talk for a few minutes, and I am going to kick the conversation over to Ann Bader and Dave Schatz at Corn Island Archaeology, and they're going to talk about the 2 archaeological sites that were identified during the Phase 1, Phase 2 identification stages of the project. So, to Ann and Dave.
My name's Dave Schatz. And I get to start with Baxter Square Cemetery. It's 15 JF 924. We excavated 2 backhoe trenches within the boundary of the park. Actually corresponds to a late 18th and early 19th century graveyard. We found 25 grave shafts, of which may have relocated based on the stratigraphy. We've got several headstone fragments, including the one that's on the screen there, which has a date at 1832, which is probably one of the last graves that was put in there. The site was covered with differential depths of fill, through indicating that from 1830 through used in development as a park, it's used as a local dumping area. Like I was touched on before, it's start is approximately 1782 and end date's 1842. We found a fair amount of artifacts, but most of those are from the disturbed overburden. And I guess we'll move on to the. Anybody about that?
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Ms. Pappas, can you just say, you said that there are differential depths of overburden kind of shafts. Can you just give us a ballpark range of what those depths were?
Up to a meter 20.
Okay.
Depended, it varied in different parts of the park, but
right.
As if the trenches, it was deeper in the southern end, indicating there was probably a swale towards the end of the park area, or the graveyard is at the time. So, sure. Moving on to the.
Hey, Dave, one more very quick comment. Again, we've received many questions about Baxter Park. One of the things that's important to note is that stage 1 of the project, so all the effects that I know of as of January 1st, 2018, does not impact the archaeological site at Baxter Square Park directly. There will be construction at Baxter Square during the first stage.
Okay. All right, moving on to the Beecher Terrace site. It's 15JF 923. We initially excavated in 4 areas, including Baxter Square. The area we worked in was Area 1 on the east corner of the project area and Walnut Street Park. Area 2 was the area of the 10th Ward School. Area 3 is to the east of the existing community center, which was another part of the original early neighborhood. And then, of course, Square Park and Cemetery was Area 4. The site itself, JF93, covers approximately 15 city blocks, depending on how you break it up over time. We did, in total, 16 backhoe trenches. 2 of those were within the park. We identified 49 features, which we excavated. Features themselves, we had 10 privies, 10 cisterns, 11 building foundations, 3 basements and cellars, 11 posts, piers, 3 walkways, and 1 alley remnant. Of those, we excavated 4 privies, 2 cisterns, 1 circular cellar, and 1 foundation wall trench. We currently have, our counts are over 4,000 artifacts collected, and that's about it. Anybody have any questions? Oh, yeah.
Yes, you do.
Oh, yeah. Oh, now it's kind of messed up here. Okay. So if you look at the Sanborn mapping, actually, that's not actually the Sanborn. That's from the, so this is from the 1939 or 37-38 that they did prior to the demolition and construction of the current Beecher Terrace housing complex. And that gives you an idea of the density, the housing and commercial ventures that were there at the time. And see on that map, Beecher or Baxter Square was never developed as a residential or commercial neighborhood. It's been either a cemetery or a park the entire, basically the entire length of the length of time the city was in existence. This was platted as early as 1832. The block along Jefferson were probably were most broken up. And then I think there were 5 lots per block. And you go south, there are 2-acre lots, and then you have 5-acre lots. So the advancement of the development went from north to south. Street and alley configurations have changed over the years. And I guess the last thing is the Old Walnut Street Park, where we've done most of the field work, has been an open park area since at least 1945. So. Any questions?
Thank you for the great summary of the archaeology. And again, if anybody has questions about what was found out there, I'd be happy to answer them.
All right.
Thanks. Shift here just a little bit and talk about a little bit about the effects of the project, just so you can see what the current phases look like. So the first phase of construction is this blue box that's over here. So this is the conceptual plan that shows the Lifelong Wellness Center and the area where it will directly be built, so that everybody just has a sense of where the actual physical construction impacts are. Also in the first stage are all 3 of these phases of demolition. The first phase of demolition is that blue box that's up in northeast corner, followed by the yellow box, that's part of the project area, and then the purple box that's over on the west side. And again, all 3 phases of this demolition are included in what we're calling the first stage. Picture of what just a bird view of what that lifelong, closer up view of what the lifelong wellness center will look like. And if you want to see any more pictures of this, it's on in the later meeting today. Just a quick streetscape photo. One of the things that will happen is the reconfiguration of the area back to the original blocks, and so this is an example of what the streetscapes will look like moving forward. And again, there's many more examples of this if anybody's interested in seeing what some of these configurations will look like.
This is the wellness center and how it affects Old Walnut Street Park. It is an active park in its physical space. His sites could be used way better in terms of if it was bought to the rights. It has a couple of football fields, baseball diamond, and all that. Considering where you're building the wellness center, you're taking half of that park, and you put that park away, and that's to me, it would be a cultural resource. Am I wrong?
The cultural resource. I don't think it wasn't defined that way as part of the study. It's clearly part of that overall. It's part of neighborhood. It's probably more than 50 years old, so it might qualify as a cultural resource.
In the fall, if you go through there after 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, it's heavy used.
Yeah, it's a utilized park.
Given that this is the edge of downtown, there's not many places to be an open park plan. I'm just wondering whether I'm talking a turn or what.
I would suggest that I'm sure Metro thought about that in the conversation about where to put the wellness center and the overall use of space in the neighborhood.
Well, I'm going to dial, this is Gina Dunlap. I'm going to dial back to your observation about, I guess, why was it identified as a cultural resource? Right. I mean, so I would defer to the preparers of the report as to what the threshold was for that consideration. But in terms of, the siting of Phase 1, we have always understood the importance of the 9th Street and Muhammad Ali intersection as a very prominent, highly trafficked corner that sets the tone for anybody that's going west of what we call the 9th Street divide. So we thought it was important for this development to have a prominently designed anchor building that helps denote, the revitalization and redevelopment that is to come. And so I agree. I mean, I do not disagree with the fact that the park is heavily used. We have been working in community with the coaches of the league football teams that use that practice field, as well as the numerous soccer teams that also utilize the field to find alternative locations for practice or for play. The next hurdle we're facing is transportation in terms of getting people to the new site. But if Ann might be able to comment on its designation.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it a little bit too. So the entire blue rectangle here, the big blue rectangle around what's called that Beecher Terrace site, that's designated as one archaeological site. So that includes everything that is in, that's in the park. Now, that's really taking into account the below ground resources. That's the archaeology aspect of it, as opposed to think of the above. I don't think, and again, Dave and Ann should correct me if I'm wrong here, was the park itself considered a separate resource? Were the above ground elements of the park considered separately? I'd defer to them.
I do know, and this is where I wish we had Matea on the phone, but certainly made the argument that the Baxter Square Park had separate resource because of certain elements. Its association with Olmsted and et cetera. I do not believe that that we had kind of concerns with Old Walnut Street Park. It might be something that Jen would like to talk about, but it's not. I don't think that. I don't think we was appropriate. That's an above ground concern there of that one.
I think as far as its eligibility for the National Register, we didn't feel like it had enough integrity and significance remaining, sort of like Baxter Park does. So that was something that was looked at. But concern seems to be a little bit in that.
Well, over some of the cultural talking about, there was a wall, there was the whole conversation about the baseball dugout being, the historical part of the cultural part of it. And so my only issue was with the actual physical location of that, which is only half block. Further, go to another slide, go forward. That's where it's located, then go to the next one. And that Old Walnut Street Park, the green area, so actually south. I understand the connectivity of streets and all that, and that little section of 9th Street is a very fast-moving, kind of crazy to go in and out of place, having mud lot right directly across 9th Street for years. And so I'm not, not important as much as I'm going to figure out.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Get that away with the park. The wellness, I have no problem with the building connecting right with the park. It's just that I think it eats up too much of the park. I already know we can't do anything to the other park because of these resources.
Well, I clarified that it has always been the development team's intention to develop that entire corner. So the park, as we discussed it, will be decommissioned. It is not a formal Louisville Metro Park, but the park as we know it will go away in its entirety as part of the development proposal. Every sign, no matter how conceptual, that's shared with the general public has that entire corner being developed and built out. That is why one of our major tenets is to bring back recreational resources, high-quality recreational resources, either on the Beecher site or definitely within the greater Russell neighborhood. So there is intention to create both passive park opportunities and active recreational parks with lots of high activities available to them.
Okay, I was looking at your little circles there at the beginning and health and all that part of it. I was just wondering whether that was part of it. Yeah. I'm sorry to take so much of it.
This is why we're here. This is exactly why we're here today. So, any other questions or comments? Because we are shift to a completely different type of conversation here pretty soon. So it's a good point. Well, with that, I'm going to kick it to Jay Stotman to talk about archaeology and public engagement, and take it away.
Okay. I have a rather large allotment of time here to talk about archaeology, and I know that there are quite a few archaeologists in the room and on the phone as well, but there are also quite a few people who are not archaeologists, so I want to address them as well with regards to what it is we do and why we do it, and what these archaeological resources that have been found at Beecher Terrace mean to not only the site itself, but to the entire Russell neighborhood, and connect those kinds of resources well, the public at large. So with, we just want to sort of define what it is archaeologists do, and basically we're defining things that people left a long time ago. These things that mostly things that people threw away. But what these things do is they give us perspective about the past, and allows us to examine how things have changed over time. It's another way of learning about history, and it's another source of data that we can use to learn about history. And many of the things that people dealt with in the past are things that people deal with in the present. So it gives us a little perspective on many of the challenges that we have as people today, to see how people in the past dealt with things as well. So we see that archaeology is a connection to the present and not just about the past. So what it does is it gives us a more complete picture of that past, and the archaeology of Beecher Terrace, it can help us understand the Russell community, and more importantly, it really helps us understand why this place is important, and the people who live there now and the people who lived there in the past are important. I'll give you a little sense. I mean, a lot of people know this already, but just a little background on the Russell neighborhood, and just to give you a sense that it was like one of the first sort of residential expansions of the city in the 1830s. In the 1830s, Louisville experienced a great deal of growth. Before that, it was sort of like a dusty little river town, but when the steamboats started flying the Ohio River in the 1830s, it started to become a major city and saw a lot of expansion. And where Russell neighborhood is now was one of those first places where neighborhoods began to develop during this period. So it has a very important history to the development of Louisville and the creation of what we know as the city today. The residents in Russell and from the beginning were quite diverse. I mean, they mostly consisted of wealthy whites who lived along the major streets like Jefferson Street and Walnut Street, which of course is now Muhammad Ali Boulevard, and middle-class whites who lived along the secondary streets or the cross streets, and then you had a large population of white immigrants, in my own family, free blacks and enslaved blacks who lived along the alleys in the smaller streets. After the war, the neighborhood became mostly middle class and poor white immigrants and blacks. A lot of the wealthy whites left. By the 1990s, they left for some of the newer neighborhoods that we know as like the Highlands and Old Louisville and places like that. And then that part of that area opened for middle class folks to move in and take over, and that's what we see. And the neighborhood basically became the heart of African American culture and prosperity in Louisville. It was the heart of this community in the late 1800s to early 1900s. After the 19-teens, you see some decline in the neighborhood. There's been a lot of theories about that. A lot of that related to economics, to larger economic issues going on in the nation at the time. But after that time, it became mostly poor whites and blacks living in tenements. A lot of absent property owners and things like that in the neighborhood. So by the late 1930s, it was sort of considered, quote, a slum, which is what they called it back then. There were efforts to sort of clear out these tenements and build new housing, which is, of course, a process that we sort of see going on today as well. And that's when Beecher Terrace was built in 1940 as part of that effort. And in the 1960s, it gets its name named after Harvey C. Russell, who was a well-known African-American educator who lived in the neighborhood at one time. And just to center you, because we're talking about Russell, which is a much bigger neighborhood than just Beecher Terrace, but Beecher Terrace is located in sort of like that oldest part of the Russell neighborhood. All right, next step. So some things that we do with regards to archaeology and how we want to get information by doing archaeology is we have questions or topics that we want to know about. We always approach every project as an opportunity to learn something, and we have to have some idea of what we want to learn before we start doing excavation. So we break it down into what we call research questions or research topics. Now, a lot of these questions are things that archaeologists are intimately interested in, but a lot of times that doesn't really translate well to people who aren't archaeologists. So I picked a few of the things out that and Dave have been talking about as research questions for doing archaeology at the Beecher Terrace site. We picked a few of these out to talk about how they relate to people in the present. One thing we like to learn about is understanding economic challenges. I kind of alluded to that in the history. This is something that archaeologists can really look at. We can look at the things that people bought because we're interested in the things that had. And because people acquire things often by purchasing them or they're consumers, we can learn about economics by looking at the things that they bought. And so we can tell things changed over time with regard to people's concerns, look at what people bought and used, and how that relates to their lives. And in a way, we know from historical records what their economic capabilities are, but if we look at the things they actually bought, a lot of times that doesn't really match up. It's kind of like today where people have a lot of resources, but they can get a really nice car or TV. We see that in history as well. So many of the people who lived in the past in this neighborhood had economic challenges, and we can see how they dealt with these challenges and how the things they had reflect in those challenges. And similar to the things, it's okay. They're similar to the kind of challenges that people face today because we have similar economic challenges. Before, this neighborhood was a center of African American culture for a period of time, and that is something that we can examine with the archaeology as well. Sometimes archaeology is a way to learn about people who may have been underrepresented in history or written history. And this is one of these areas where archaeology can do that, help us learn a little bit more about this important period in neighborhood's history and, frankly, Louisville's history. So we can look at the African American community's power as consumers, because at this time, at the time of this neighborhood, legal status or freedom to participate, other aspects, things because of segregation were very limited. So to see how this culture developed using their power as consumers is something we can do with archaeology. Something that archaeologists are really interested in is ethnicity and race. We can look at different ethnic groups, and we know the history of the Russell neighborhood. We know that the Russell neighborhood was a pretty diverse place with a number of immigrant groups who lived in there, differing social economic groups, people with different classes, that is, and races as well. We can look at the diversity of these neighborhoods in that way and look at the things that people bought, trying to sort of maintain the identity as Americans or as German or Irish immigrants in things that they buy, or trying to use consumerism as a way to become like every other American. You know, the things they bought look like everyone else. Pardon? Okay, and so we want to look at things like artifacts to help us understand how different between different groups. Do any differences in their diet? That's why you see these animal bones along the side there, because people's diet and the kinds of foods they prepare and eat often reflect their cultural groups they belong to. And just want to look at these kinds of things. And should I have for people as well is like, how does knowing this history affect how residents think about themselves and their community today? Because we often, I believe that we think as food and the things that we buy is reflecting our culture today. Well, it did for people in the past too, and we want to make that link. Okay. Is a really important thing too, because it has a lot to do with how things develop in a neighborhood. And this is directly affecting the neighborhood today, because that's what Vision, that's what previous revitalization efforts in the neighborhood have to do. By changing the landscape, we want to try to change the trajectory of the neighborhood or the in the neighborhood. And so we can look at how things have developed over time as archaeologists in the same way. So how did landscape issues affect neighborhood? One example is are the cemeteries. Rudd happens to have two prominent cemeteries, one being where Beecher Square Park is now, but also Western Cemetery located just a few blocks to the west. How cemeteries affect how it developed and how it changed over time. Because at some point, and I know from research I've done in Western Cemetery, Western Cemetery becomes an eyesore when it's closed down and no longer maintained. Did that affect who to move in the neighborhood, or people may have left the neighborhood? So these are things that we can study as archaeologists as well. And again, these are very relevant to the concerns that a lot of people have with regards to landscape today, because say industry moves in that's not real friendly neighborhoods, that affects who comes and goes.
Jay.
Yes, Darnell.
Did the neighborhood come after the cemetery, or did the cemetery come before? And I'm on that because most of a lot of cemeteries are like on the outside.
Yeah, the cemetery came before, but certainly the neighborhood grew up around the cemetery, but the condition of the cemeteries changed after they were neighborhoods, which is basically the effort to turn Western Cemetery and Baxter, the first cemetery, into parks is really related to that. Because they see these things as eyesores and then improve the neighborhood from an eyesore. Dave, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was going to kind of answer his question about the when the timeline. Baxter Square is probably the original Pioneer Cemetery. So it starts essentially before the city is founded.
Yep. Another question that we'll talk about, and something that archaeology is really good at, is health and sanitation, and that's an issue for all people at all times in history, and it's for people in Louisville as well. So we can look at the sanitary conditions that people lived in throughout the neighborhood's history, and look at how people treated ailments. They were getting sick. How did they deal with those? And of course, these are things that resonate with people today as well, because we're still doing the same kinds of things. So we can look at some bottles, what medicines were they using, try and treat things. We can look at how residents disposed of their waste, which is not as simple of a thing as you think it might be. Back in the past, obviously, because Baxter Square, well, the cemetery of Baxter Square, they dumped for a while. So we really understand how people dispose of their waste and what kind of effect that had on their lives. And again, something else that's pretty relatable today. The last research topic that I want to discuss is that we think about what archaeology can do for the community today as a research topic, and not just additional things that we like to study as archaeologists. In fact, we treat archaeology's impact on the present-day community with just as much attention. And And so that's why I have it listed as a research topic, because the process of doing archaeology, the things we learn from archaeology, can have effect on the community today. So that we can create with this mind is trying to link what we do as archaeologists to the community today, and that is, you know, community. Does that make people feel more connected to the people who lived there before and to that place? That's a question that we should ask those who live in the community. Would putting in an archaeological excavation or part of that process help connect people to the history and the identity of the community that's there? Would people who live in the neighborhood like to see the things found during the archaeology used in exhibits or educational materials tell people about the history of Russell neighborhood and the story of the Russell neighborhood? And where these things go? They're show in the Fraser History Museum. Should they go in the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage? Those kinds of things. So these are questions that we should address with the archaeology as well. Educational materials, of course, and archaeology to help students in school, so we can create educational materials that well. And the most important question related to this is the local community and history important? Where they live there before and the people who live there now, are they important? And that's something that archaeology can help expose. And I've been asked to sort of talk a little bit about archaeological methods. So like when we're talking about archaeology, what does that actually mean? What people see on the ground there. So when we start doing archaeology, what are they going to see? And what are they doing and why are they doing it? So generally, archaeological methods, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find that stuff, what we artifacts that was left by people a long time ago. But more importantly, we have to know where these artifacts are found, which is what we call the context. So we find these things, but we need to know exactly where they were found to get the full information that we can from them. And everything we do as archaeologists in the field is really geared towards that. So working in an urban environment here in Russell neighborhood, there are some kind of unusual methods you might think of that you don't typically see on an archaeology dig, and that is the use of machinery and like that. So when Dave was talking earlier about digging trenches, they used a machine to do that because so many things have happened to landscape in urban areas that sometimes you have to remove a lot of that to get to the information that we need to see. And because there's a lot of heavy machinery that can be used, it makes doing some public outreach a little bit difficult sometimes, but something that you need to know about nonetheless. So you see a few pictures here of one of those efforts where digging in a parking lot, and one is the Baxter Square Park, all the different layers that can accumulate over time. I'll say when I see a parking lot in downtown, usually I see an archaeological site because even if it makes it harder to dig through, it often preserves a lot of the things that were left a long time ago. So features that Dave was talking about before, features are basically what we call, they're human-made things that you can't really like take out of the ground and take it back to your lab and wash them up like we can artifacts. So they include things like foundations of buildings, these priests that Dave was talking about, which are outhouse pits, post holes, which are the holes that people dug to put like a fence post or something like that in the ground. Cellars, lots of houses have cellars, so they have a big hole for that. But these things often get filled up with the trash that people left behind a long time ago when they stopped using them. And thus, they came all these things that, all this trash that we're interested in seeing. Some features we do dig by hand, just to keep that in mind. We don't dig everything using a machine. but in some cases for safety, we may have to do that. But whenever possible, we try to dig these by hand, shovels and trowels and things like that. For, these, all the soil that we get from these things, we put them through sifters so that we can find the artifacts. The thing about these features is, again, they were used for trash disposal, so they tend to have a lot of things in them. A lot of the things in them tend to be pretty big pieces. Coal, you can see an example from another site down there. And when we have bigger objects and whole objects to work with, it gives us a better sense of, it gives us more data to work with. Yeah, go ahead, that's good. Okay, so that's like your Archaeology 101. All right, so public outreach strategy. So this is what I'm here to talk about is what kind of opportunities do we have through this archaeology process to engage the public and to connect with the public using archaeology. So based on a philosophical point, what we want to do is we want to see public archaeology as an integral part of the project, not traditional research, but it is a main part of what we do as archaeology, just as much as trying to learn about ethnicity or race. But for every public archaeology outreach event or program or whatever it is we do, there need to be goals like we have for our other research topics. We want to have goals so that we can measure and better relate what we're doing with the community and to accept input from the community. So these the efforts will have to work in concert with other things going on in Russell. Like Vision Russell has a number of present-day cultural initiatives and community initiatives that they're doing. Archaeology can be a part of that. And any programming that we do in the Russell neighborhood can be a part of that. So keep that in mind is that archaeology is, not kind of an add-on. It's not one of these things where we're going to do the archaeology and just invite people to come see it. It really is an engagement process. Archaeology has power to do some things regards to this. All right. Basically, the way I've divided up the public archaeology opportunities for this project, divided up into three basic types. There are things that can be done on site during the excavation. One about archaeologists, maybe you don't know what it is, but people are really interested in it. It's really interesting to see things. The thrill of finding something is inherently interesting to everyone, and probably more so for archaeologists. But it never gets old. But that is something that would provide an opportunity for people to see and experience as well. Especially people in the community where archaeologists are working, and they're working in a community where people are still living and people still moving around and people are still seeing things. And so there's an opportunity there to engage people. Boat engagement, so these are things that can take place off-site. There are, through technology, there are ways of engaging people without actually making them go anywhere. And then you have post-excavation programs. So there's things that can be done after the excavation is over, after the archaeology has been done, that can continue to live on in the neighborhood using the information and the process of archaeology to help educate people. So, so these three basic things. There are strategies that can be employed in that, and I'm going to go through those strategies in a minute. But I want to make sure that people understand that all these strategies have to be able to reach a variety of audiences. There are a lot of different people out there. You got the general public, you got local residents, school groups, and all these people have different ways that they like to engage in things. You have different kinds of learners, visual learners, auditory learners, and tactile learners. Archaeology can engage all these people. And project team will have to engage in an active program to recruit people, because it's one thing to be doing archaeology, and I'd love to think that I'm enough that just because I'm there, people are going to want to come. Not always that's not always the case. So there will have to be some real active programs sort of engage to go out and get people and seek them out and bring them in. And then this really has an opportunity not only to engage with the community, but also provide a lot of public relations for the development in general. As part of getting people involved, it gets people more involved in the process of creating this place. And not just creating buildings in these, L's, but putting meaning in those places too. And that's something that archaeology can do. It can create meaning. Okay. All right, so some of these strategies that we're talking about, the on-site during excavation strategies. I'll go ahead and do that. One way that you can do those is through signage. This is a pretty simple thing. There are some people who just love to watch digging happening. Whether it's archaeological or not, people like to see digging. And that's all they'll want to do, is just sit there. Well, I've had people pull up lawn chairs and sit them next to an excavation unit and just watch me dig. Hey, to each their own. But signage can really engage people like that. So developing some signage while excavation is going on will tell people who are, who may be going about their usual business during the day and wondering what is going on over there. It gives them an opportunity to engage that way. They can just read some signage without think they're bothering anybody or not have to talk to anyone. And signage is a pretty easy thing to do. But these signs do have to keep in mind that, that they have to be engaging themselves. There needs to be pictures and they need to be brief. Share things like that. Or is good. Some people really like to interact and talk with people rather than reading stuff. So it's usually good to have, someone who's working on the dig to engage with the public. That would be someone designated who could do that job to sort of talk to people, tell people what's going on, kind of all the things you would have on a sign. But it also gives an opportunity for archaeologists to get feedback from people and what they think about what's going on and engage in a meaningful discussion about things. It's pretty amazing the things that I learn from people who visit my archaeology dig sites. I'm always amazed at what I can learn about my site from people who come and visit. So on the situation, you could possibly do some archaeological type tours or have an ability to engage people in person. Participation. Now, of course, this is the sort of ultimate of site sort of things, is to actually get people involved in active finding something that hasn't been seen in over 100 years, because it's that thrill of discovery thing. So it's something that can be done. I mean, it takes a lot of experience and a lot of effort to do it. It is highly rewarding. There may be situations during this project that might happen. Given the nature of it, it will be difficult to do some of these things, but I think it can happen, especially doing sifting, maybe digging, or maybe an event, a special event, on an event or two during a weekend where it can be tightly controlled and what people are working on can be tightly controlled. So I think there are opportunities there that will make it safe and to make it non-intrusive to the project at hand. So that is something definitely to consider as well. All right, remote engagement, and this is sort of, in the age of technology, we have social media, and lots of people like to follow time sort of things going on through social media, as Nick can attest to. There are you got your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and probably a few other things I don't know about. That people follow all the time. And so if we engage that technology, we can engage people in that way too, because people are constantly on their phones and hey, what's going on with the archaeology dig site? What is the find of the day? And some explanation about that. And so there's a way for people to follow what's happening with the archaeology project and learn about the history and learn about archaeology in the process. and websites. There can be, live streaming video. There can be people who contribute. And I suggest, time to existing platforms such as the Vision Russell website, which they have a great website. So, doing some updates, providing content for this website as things are happening, it would be a great place to advertise any public programming that might be going on, and also featuring things that have been found, things that have been learned. All right, excavation strategies. Again, there's a participation element that can be done. So after the dig is over, you have wash nights. You can do those during the dig as well. But people can engage with the artifacts and archaeologists in that way too, such as at the community center. Have wash night. People come in, see the artifacts, help clean the artifacts, learn about them, learn how we catalog and how we learn about consumerism and health by looking at that medicine bottle. So there's a way to get people involved in that way. Educational materials, and this is something that I would really particularly push for because these have the longest effect. So based on artifacts and information that is generated from the archaeological process, can be turned into things that can be used in the school. Develop lessons, activities, curricula that local schools, and not only local schools, but schools throughout Louisville, and they can learn about Russell that way too, as well as to people who actually live here. But this is something that can happen over a longer period of time because however long people use the activities and stuff is how long it takes, and it's also something that can be done after the excavations are over. You don't have to necessarily take place at that time. So this is something that's been used successfully. This example is from the Davis Bottom neighborhood in Lexington, which has been a very successful education project that is really engaged with the community there. And I think similar things can happen here. Example of that. This is an activity that teaches kids about stratigraphy, something they have to learn in school anyway. They can use the archaeology project conducted in the Russell neighborhood to learn about the scientific principle of stratigraphy and artifact interpretation. This is a way to use resources in their neighborhood, thus making them even more important, and their neighborhood more important, but to learn about themselves through this activity. You can classroom visits after the excavations are over, administering some of these educational materials, but also talking about the project, talking about archaeology in general, and talking about their neighborhood and what was learned about that neighborhood, and help sort of create the neighborhood. Public presentations and museum exhibits, these are kind of things that we all always sort of think about. Traditionally done doesn't mean that they're obsolete, because they are still good ways to engage people as well. So doing exhibits is one thing that would be really good, especially when you have the Center for African American Heritage in the neighborhood already. So some of the things from the neighborhood can be displayed there and talk about the history of where that museum is located.
Segue.
Yep. and really needs to be some partnership with this museum, with the Center of Heritage here, because it is in the neighborhood. It's a renovated building in the neighborhood. It is a result of a previous effort to revitalize the Russell neighborhood that took place in the mid-90s. And we have an opportunity here with this project, partner with them and do something really interesting. There is also print media, although it tends to be kind of pay, and I think there is some debate about how things actually go to but it still can be a pretty effective tool. So say you want to produce a booklet about archaeology in the Russell neighborhood, there would need to be some questions about how and who gets these things. So before I do print media, I would say we are committed to handing these things out to every person in the neighborhood, kind of thing, or making it gets a copy so that they can hold. People still like to hold books and things like that, and they're kind of keepsakes, they're more permanent. So that's something that can be looked at as well. Okay. And morely, we have things like booklets, but they're on the web. So this is the Heritage Spotlight series from KYTC, and similar types of things can be done in conjunction with, say, the Vision Russell website to post some of these online publications so that people can access them and learn something that archaeology learned about archaeology and what archaeologists learned about in their neighborhood. All right.
Fun.
This is for me.
You are totally on schedule, man. I commend you for finishing it. That was awesome. So Jay went through an awful lot of information there. What I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time now unpacking some of that information. One of the goals of this meeting is to really engage the consulting parties, those of you who are consulting with Metro, to find out which of the research topics resonate with the consulting parties here, and which of the ideas that are proposed by Jay would be things that folks would find particularly useful for the residents of the Russell neighborhood, and how can we really best engage the neighborhood in archaeological exploration and the mitigations. So before we dive,
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
No,
go ahead.
So can we go back to slide 7?
Wow. That's a long way back.
Yeah, just don't stare at the screen while it's
Sorry.
Slide 7, okay. So I think, this does a really great job capturing what's already been done and what's reflected, at least in the 2 documents. There's a cultural resource report and a draft data recovery plan, right? What I'm trying to understand better is when I think about the fact that there were 16 trenches dug on site, and there were features identified, and more than 4,000 artifacts recovered from all 4 areas that are of interest, is there a need or a desire to do additional excavation and exploration? Or maybe you can clarify. I'm assuming if there's a data recovery plan, is it suggesting that we do additional excavation, or, that we've already got so much data, why doing more?
Right.
So that question came from Gina at Louisville Metro, and we're going to kick the answer to Nick Laraquente of Kentucky Heritage Council.
The work, the 16 trenches, it was, I guess, a year and a half ago. The question was, when Beecher Terrace was built, did it disturb everything? Did it just wipe the ground clean? And so the 4 areas that they've looked at was a sample to get an idea of what exactly is below the ground. Is it all disturbed or is it not? So the 16 trenches, they give you an idea that, yes, we have intact features, we have these types of artifacts. These are the archival materials that are available for this site, and so there is potential here. It's how we've determined that the entire 15 blocks is an eligible archaeological site. So if you dig outside those areas that were sampled, there would almost certainly be other artifacts, other features that were very much like what was Area 2 or Area 3. So the step that we have to take now is through the archival data that Dave kind of just mentioned that was done. We need to start talking about what areas do we need to focus on. Based on the historic records, we want to talk about these people, sample these lots, talk about these questions, and that's going to happen be anywhere within that blue area is potentially something that would be looked at.
Yeah, you answer those questions I talked about unless you do more excavation. Because these are, if you think about what they did during the Phase 2 archaeological work, is they're just sampling. So getting an idea of what's there. And certainly that is not enough to answer the questions that I discussed and that Dave and Anna put forward to learn about. So there needs to be a significant more amount of work or a strategy done that will address those questions. To work, help create those questions. So what's there helps create those questions, and now they have to come up with a plan, or you come up with a plan to how to address those questions with doing additional work.
And hypothetical.
Out there was.
Oh, sorry, go on, Dan.
Basically, what we did out there was to explore areas that were open and not occupied by buildings, and those were the areas that we had access to. What we've learned through the archival stuff is that the historic occupation was not consistent through that neighborhood. So, for instance, up along Jefferson Street, there are larger lots. There are higher income peoples that were living there. Down in the southwest corner, they were more densely populated, and you had a predominance of German and Irish immigrants. On the other corner, down by Old Walnut Street Park, might have had a predominance of African American and mulatto folks that were sitting there doing, and they had an unusually high incidence of professional blacks, which is something that is very interesting. So, you have to look at different areas based on the different kinds of things that were going on in those areas. And if we only tested in a couple areas, we might miss out on the total history of the whole. So that's what the archival work is telling us. Who was living in what areas, and what were they doing, and how were they different? And then we can go in and sample those different kind of areas to get a sense of what's going on in the entire neighborhood.
Comes right off the bat.
This is unfair. So I was just trying to assess when you have things that happen below ground and to get a continuum of time. Hit on it when we were talking about the African American Heritage Center, which wasn't originally something historic like, going to be a museum. It was actually a working class building. In this configuration, in that blue line area, we're still talking about what was a project. We're still talking about what was a neighborhood. And I so for the life of me in all of these projects, kind of development like this, can understand how you tell the whole story of something and wipe out something that was there before. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm to replace it. I mean, they've had their time, but I'm saying for the casual person coming through the neighborhood, how they interpret that this was once a project and what did that look like versus the pieces of something that have been in the past as an interpretation. It's almost like what we're doing right now wrong, so we're doing something else. I mean, and it could be, interpreted as an evolution in time. I'm just trying to figure out how do we capture this area of time as we move on to the newer phrase of it. And I guess this is something that just hadn't been determined yet. And I don't want to baby out with the bath.
No. So we'll talk about that as a lot of mitigation focused on that will come up when we talk about the above-ground resources. The key above-ground resource that will be impacted by the project is the Beecher Terrace, the Beecher Terrace projects. And the history of those projects is essential. And there are several different mitigation ideas that are strongly focused on capturing as much of that history as possible. The Louisville Story Project, the ethnographic film about the neighborhood, archiving as many of the documents as possible at Western Archives and or the African American Cultural Center, bringing that information together, capturing those stories, see it as a vital part of mitigation. It's a little bit different objective than what's expressed for the below ground, which aims at the period of history that predates the existing Beecher Terrace, but no less significant. That's your question.
I think we're not really talking about that part right now. The stuff that exists today is kind of a product just of how complex all of it is, because there's so many historic resources that the only way we make progress and keep forward momentum on this is to isolate one piece at a time. And so I think, has this been really the first discussion of just the archaeology?
This is the first meeting where we've separated out the below from the above ground.
Right. If that helps.
Right. Also, to reiterate, the existing buildings at Beecher Terrace are also a historic property that's nationally eligible for the National Register. We have, out here, we've got Baxter Square Park, which is a historic property. We have the archaeological site, which is underneath the current Beecher Terrace, which is a national eligible resource. We have Beecher Terrace itself, the current buildings, which are a historic resource as well. So all of this test that we're going through right now is taking into account effects to all of those sources that have been identified there. Even though right now we're thinking about just kind of one big one. This meeting here.
So at 6 to 8, you're going to talk about the existing building.
And what you were saying about, like, we're replacing what's here, this whole process is basically deciding what's called the mitigation for the series, the properties that are being lost by the project. And that's the opportunity to say, this is what's important to Russell. These are stories that we want to capture, that we want to flesh out more, because there's many different areas of stories all associated with these 15, 16 blocks here. There's a quick.
So I get what Darnell was saying. As someone who has been involved in this neighborhood very much, been involved with the Center for African American Heritage very much.
Hey, can you all hear on the speaker? Do you want to come? Sorry, I was pointing at the speaker, not at the.
I'm going to speak loud enough.
Yeah.
Can you identify who's asking the question?
This is Martina Cunneghy.
Hey, Martina.
I'm with Neighborhood Planning and Preservation, Samuel Plato, Academy of Historic Preservation Trades, and I'm the former Director of Exhibits at the African American Heritage Center. I come to the table with a lot of, I have a framework that I come to the table with, and I recognize what you're saying, that some of these that Darnell is raising will be discussed later. And Darnell's going to be here later, so I will make an effort to be here later.
Excuse me for asking these questions.
Well, I think that it's very, very important. Both Darnell and I are products of this community, and we've seen projects such as these over years, and processes similar to these over years. To go to a opening of a facility in Smoketown the other day with some Smoketown residents who were doing an oral history. So, and it was interesting listening to them talk about their sense of loss over what happened with Shepherd Square, and sitting interviewed for their oral history. And the use of that building, it's just fabulously renovated inside, and there's this health facility inside. But it was not necessarily what the residents wanted. And people that sat in that hallway waiting to be interviewed talked about all the wonderful things that used to go on in the building. They go back to the cultural aspect aspects that Darnell was referencing a while ago with the loss of the recreational space, that sort of thing. So I just want you to know that as we get deeper into these conversations, especially in lieu of the fact of communities we have lost, Clarksdale, etc., and we have gained or not gained, this is one of the last bastions of this history, and it is valuable to the people who lived in this community. It's valuable to the folks who wanted to live in this community. The kind of issues will be coming forth probably stronger than they have before, because and the value that has resulted from these kind of projects and has benefited from these kind of projects.
I might just ask a question.
He can catch up with the meeting that happens tonight. It will be recorded, right?
Yeah, the 6 o'clock meeting on above ground resources will have the same format. We'll be recording that. As we improve our skills in webinars, we'll find ways to make it available to anybody that would like to. I can't.
We're gonna figure
I haven't figured it out yet,
We're gonna get there. I think
but it does work. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It is the goal to engage as much as possible. You know. All right. Well, does anybody on the phone have any other questions, comments?
Reactions?
Hatfield with Preservation Kentucky. I thought Jay's presentation was outstanding, and I just wanted to thank him for it. And I take the questions being asked as well.
And this is here from the HP. I just wanted to say I appreciated the presentation as well, and look forward to talking about more detail about the programmatic agreement at the next meeting.
From the Office of Archaeology, I again echo what everyone else has said. I think Jay's presentation was fabulous. I have to take off here in a minute, so I just want to say, in regards to the topics on the table right now, I really think a lot of the suggestions in terms of the community engagement involvement in the archaeology that Jay brought up, having participated in those in other contexts and also seeing those project action, other situations, I think they are very vital into addressing some of the concerns the community has about their history disappearing. And I think it's a way of making sure that it doesn't get forgotten, doesn't get lost. And I think the ideas bringing to the table really are something we need to take very seriously and really work to make sure are implemented into this project moving forward. Because the archaeology resources here are very rich and are very fantastic and do tell a very vital story. And I think that's the way we need to go.
Fantastic. I have is, are there, Jay went through a lot of research topics. Are there any other topics that anybody feels we should be bringing forth that they think could help engage the community more, or any other topics of conversation that folks put on the table?
And I appreciate Jay's work, and I hope I didn't sound as if I don't believe in archaeology or the importance of further logical research. And you did touch on it a little bit. The history of the Russell community is still very poorly understood, and part of that is political. So it's very popular to consider this as a neighborhood where most of the African Americans were poor, they didn't own their homes, and yada, yada, yada. But there's research going on that indicates otherwise, and so you're finding some of those elements where, perhaps they were living more affluent style is very, very important. We're seeing now that there were more homeowners in the community then than possibly now. And I think the further we get into this, we're going to see more evidence of that. The fellow that funded Black Russell was a man named Washington Spradling, who was certainly a man of immense wealth, given the standards of the time. And one of his sons founded Smoketown. And this is a story of wealth that was developed within the African American community that had roots for at least a couple of generations. And then, of course, the subsequent story is what happened to that wealth. And that maybe 100 years ago we had more African American homeowners than we now realize that. What are the systematic events that have brought that about? So archaeology is going to be very important, if nothing else, to establish that perhaps this community was a little bit more sophisticated than a lot of folks think, and not just an entertainment district.
It was definitely a more, this is Dave Scott. I'll offer that. It's definitely a more affluent area than people probably give it credit for. One of the things that I'd like to address during the phase 3 is I like to look at the economics involved. So I like to look at home ownership, land ownership, and how that ownership changes over time. You know, one of the things I like to do, and I've done on previous projects, is to look, and land prices, how they vary over years, and then try to associate those with the economics of the time period. So that can give us a much richer view of the transition of neighborhoods from one stage to another. So yeah, that's something that we want to look at for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other element is, and this is what we're talking about. The other element is the impact of urban renewal. We always talk about urban renewal in terms of the structural loss. In this case, urban renewal with structural loss during the height of Jim Crow essentially destroyed the Black entrepreneurial class in Russell because they had no place to go.
Walnut Street.
Yeah, and beyond Old Walnut Street. So currently we tend to think of Walnut Street, we tend to think of entertainment districts. We're sort of a narrow focus, and so going forward, that is the type of history I would like to see uncovered, is, and that's part of that cycle I'm talking about, that's systemic. When you wipe out home ownership, when you wipe out the Black entrepreneur with no place to go in Louisville, Kentucky, what happens, and how long do we feel that? We're feeling that to this day. So,
And by the connective to downtown and the rest of West Louisville, and it's something that resonates and has been, when you talk about history of Black Louisville, that book just came out not too long ago, and there was some books that I've been collecting about not only Black Louisville, but as the white communities of Herschel, where they talked about the 20s flappers and stuff like that. And that 1940s period when this housing area was built, there's to me, talk about tourism, when you talk about the ethnicity and the commercial aspect of how Louisville grew out. It's just a lot more than just this area, and ways torn between, for me, that says go at it,
right.
Go and build, and then the part that says, well, hold up, there may be something here that we're not grading that may be part of it. And I think that's part of Jay's act about trying to keep connectivity of the whole.
We're getting involved in, as you say, in other areas. we've been doing a large project in the California neighborhood, also 18th Street, and other places in downtown, but other West End areas where we're getting similar data, and so we've got a broader database that we can rely upon to help interpret what we see here at Russell as well, and how that extends, as you see, beyond the area that we're looking at right now.
Well, fantastic conversation to help drive the research questions for data recovery, which is a big goal of today's meeting, is to help with some of those topics. Have other thoughts or comments about the sort of broader research topic?
Have you gotten any feedback from other consulting parties that perhaps aren't here today in written form yet about potential project or research questions for the brief? No? Okay.
We'll circulate the request.
Yeah, right. I was wondering if you had anything come in that hadn't been brought up.
No, not yet.
Okay, thank you.
The other topic that I was hoping we would get some feedback about that Jay spoke about, all of those different forms of engagement and how practical they were for this particular project, and whether or not they would whether or not they would resonate here in the Russell neighborhood. Included on-site engagement. It included remote engagement and learning objectives. Post-excavation engagement. Do we think all of those different forms of engagement would be something that would be productive for this particular project, and that folks in the Russell neighborhood would be interested in and would want to participate in?
I think that to some degree, every aspect of those three types should be included. It depends on site. On-site participation may not be logistically as easy. Hard hats and stuff, dangerous trenches for kids to fall in, that kind of stuff. But ways around it. Having a weekend where you do something like that. But I think we should investigate that as much as possible and plan on at least some. And the remote thing, actually spoken to Beecher at Central High School, where we have a website class. Maybe that class can do a time project with the archaeological thing, stuff like that. So all kinds of things that we can do for that remote thing that might be a lot easier and still get people involved. Now, the post thing I think is very important, developing things that last a long time, because we want these memories and the history to be, that's the whole point. Developing curriculum to teach kids about the history of the Russell neighborhood. It was a exhibition or a traveling art show, or I don't know, something like that would be really important. I know timelines and construction are difficult to work around with the on-site thing, so I think that would take some planning and some, with the the actual construction people and stuff like that. I don't want to take away from the archaeologist in the middle of when they're digging a feature and they have to get it out because it's going to pour down rain the next day.
Thanks much, Lori.
Yeah. So we need to plan some things that can either happen, very well planned out that can into the public. Signage, I think, is key to have some stuff that tell the people that they can do that, but I think we need to have something that some people can walk and talk to, but we want to make sure.
The thing is that this particular, and Jay knows it and you all know it, I've expressed this to other folks, that this is a particularly healthy unsafe environment many times. I'm very worried about our workers, let alone having little children who you have to maybe sometimes herd like a bunch of little cats, run off. When you're very, very deep holes and the grounds are unstable and the ground can collapse, that worries me. You have kids screening, material comes out of toilets, and you've got rusty glass, glass and rusty nails, and you're worried whether they've had their tetanus shots. Those kinds of things, are things that you hesitate to have the responsibility for. But I like the idea of having something specifically set up outside of where we're actively working in another area that maybe is more near surface, maybe around the foundation or the top of a feature or something where they can get involved and they're not exposed to some of these hazards. That's kind of, as you maybe on the weekend or a specific day or something where it's not involved to this place. We got to be safe.
Cleaning features off would be something that, good engagement kind of thing, but around deep excavations, I'm like Anna, very hesitant about that as well.
You don't want to lose any little kids down the...
Our method, even adult too, because our methodology...
Might want to lose that.
Well, now, Dave, I'm going to let you fall in.
I've done that before.
Oh, okay.
Dave, I got a question for you. So you guys were out there for the phase 1 and phase 2, and certainly people, you encountered some curious people, and did you have an idea of where people who are interested, people who might want to talk or might want to know what's going on, that kind of thing?
Yes, there were. And there could be always something like, if you don't want to take the time having archaeologists come away from the site and actually talk to these people all the time they come up. We can always have some kind of a sandwich board sign or something. Here's what we're doing and here's why. And if you want to talk or something, we'll be a certain time and we can give you a few, something, because sometimes it does detract from the work when you're sitting here trying to address all these people as they come up and they want to get close and they want to get into this area, and I'm sitting here already worried about whose mother I may have to call and say, hey, your kid fell in a hole or something like that. There needs to be a way to do it, but yes, they do come up and they're very interested and you want to share it with them, but it does take away a little bit of your productivity.
Yeah.
Well, that can be planned for, and it can be all can be planned for, safety issues and your budgeting as well.
Right. I was thinking of, like every day, or not, maybe not every day, twice a week at this time, the archaeologist is available for questions, and on the weekend, or,
Generally, that doesn't work, though.
Okay.
I'm just going to say, this is always I'm walking by kind of thing.
Yep.
And no one's going to come for it. No one's going to come because it's scheduled at this time or that time. I learned that over and over again at Riverside, and it just never works. But when people are there, they'll be there. And if we think about how to make it safe, and if you think about being for someone to do that job specifically, I think that can be done and alleviate any concerns you have with that. My has always been that you can do anything, you just have to plan for it.
Harnesses.
Well, what up, fencing?
So I wonder just posed a very important question, and acknowledge the fact that the people to respond to that question, the residents are severely underrepresented, and so I don't count myself, but we've got Darnell, we've got Martina. I have to just check in on the phone line and make sure if anybody else has dialed into this call, because the question is, do residents, would they be interested? Do they find value? Is this important to them?
Right.
I'm just pointing out that we're really at a disadvantage for answering that question.
Absolutely.
And perhaps there's opportunities to use our website and our distribution list, even outside the consulting parties, to pose that question, right? I'm just saying that, but I would like to just check and see if there's anybody else that has joined us after we've begun the call that might want to weigh in on that those critical questions. Okay.
So we're more than happy. Preservation Kentucky is more than happy to help, generate some communications to get out to residents. I don't know how you're communicating with the Russell residents, but database in constant contact, e-blast, social media, etc. We're happy to help in any way we can just to get the word out.
Tina Cunnington speaking again. This discussion reminds me of the disconnect we always have in projects like this. And absolutely correct, we're sitting in a bubble and trying to determine the interest level of something we think is interesting among folks that few of us, and I would argue I have quite a bit of exposure, and Darnell does too, few of us really interact with folks today. In the Russell area and in Beecher Terrace specifically, the people that I have interacted with, they are concerned about the loss of community. And so to say to them, we're going to have a neat activity, and it is a neat activity, and I would love to be part of it. I was going to be an archaeologist, I thought, years ago. I was also around when we did some archaeological work at the Center for African American Heritage. Also a witness to some of the archaeological work that took place at the Portland Wharf. So we start out with these great ideas about what's going to be fun and what's going to be great, and it is fun and it is great, but we're dealing in communities that have other things on their mind. They're not going to be coming in the middle of the day to do something such as this. So I want to point that out. We have this disconnect of what would be growing the best of all possible worlds. And in this case, we have Beecher Terrace, which is very, very different. In Portland's case, with Portland, which is very, very different. So that's in. Seems to be doing the same things over and over, and we're not results that we think we're going to get or want to get.
Well, this is Darnell Ferris. It's really hard to get that target audience that you want to come in. People read things in the newspaper and they're on the run and they work, and we're based on what we do, and it's just a whole different level. There's one museum that has its own artifacts and stuff like that, and it's not as widely used probably and as it probably should be. And the whole thing that I guess I'm here for is the whole thing of connectivity, trying to connect these neighborhoods with its downtown, it's more popular part of it, and how these neighborhoods came into being, and that there's actually, put on development hat, some money being made here. And the whole interpretation of how you lead a tour is that tour has a where you actually, at some point in these conversations, it's about this certain part of that area had more resources for African Americans than other parts of it. You still have to understand that whole 15-block area, but it has to be the hold up of the whole neighborhood. It's just like that. When the neighborhood's more engaged, projects move smoother.
Yeah. This is like I said before, is a building they will come sort of thing. Because it's got to be, any of these efforts has to have a very active effort to engage people. You have to go to the community, engage them. Just because you put it there doesn't mean anybody's going to show up.
Right.
And so there are a variety of different ways to do it, and relying on people in the neighborhood is going to be the best way to sort of to do that. But yeah.
Just tacking on to what Darnell just referenced, the potential tourism, and once again, Jay, the Portland project and some of what happened around the Center for African American Heritage. You're not talking about the oldest part of the city. We're talking about where our city began. And it is an awful shame that we have not, folks that were working on Portland Wharf, we're certainly trying to do that. This is where the richest history is, and there are opportunities going forward that will involve the people in the neighborhood, not folks from outside, to develop a real tourist. Despite the amount of things that we've torn down, there's still that potential. And what a wonderful thing that would be if we could finally pull that off. But in Portland and other West Louisville.
Yeah, everywhere else.
Everywhere.
Everywhere else west of Ninth Street.
Well, South End too,
Yeah.
so.
Can I ask a question about, in your presentation, you had a lot of the Davistown Bottom, the curricula that was developed for that kind of long-term impact. One of the reasons that worked and it was developed was there was a very active partnership with the schools and a constant back and forth with the actual teachers, the people in the community to develop that thing. What are those relationships like here? Are there some that exist or some that need to be established already, or?
Yeah, there's some relationship, because school district itself. But yeah, some of those will have to be established with local schools. I would target the school in the neighborhood, take particular schools, and approach them about helping to develop it, help test it, and administer it.
Let me share my experience with you from Center for African American Heritage, where we at one point, now it wasn't archaeological, but we had started it was our suitcase program. And so in the suitcase, we had elements that represented, one that we did was slavery. And mention that to say that there was such enthusiasm from JCPS for that program. It's too bad things went the way they did. But there is an interest at the schools for unique experiences like this. So I think the schools would definitely buy into something along those lines because it would be different and engaging for the children. Yeah.
And it's their home too.
That's right.
Too often they read about other places that aren't their place, it's not their neighborhood, and they're so different from their neighborhood. And if they can relate to the place where they live, I'd say more enriching.
But even though I know we're talking about mitigating for the community, but it would have broad interest, I believe, beyond the neighborhood.
Oh, it would definitely be interesting beyond the neighborhood as well. But I think for those folks who live in it, because that my neighborhood is important enough that I want to study that, and my neighborhood is important enough that has passion in it that helps me learn. That I can use to learn history. The history here is just as important as the history in Washington, D.C.
But it probably make up for the loss of a football field there.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with people's athletic fields.
But I wanted, if I can, just real quick, I wanted to circle back to something that Darnell brought up earlier, which is that thinking about where we're going with the actual mitigation efforts here, there's no necessary reason that the archaeological information has to stand apart from the information about Beecher Terrace now. The product may be a combination of those things that takes a long-term look at that space. Okay, here's 15, 16 city blocks that are impacted by this project. What's the long-term look? And it kind of gets back to this point that you brought up about there was a neighborhood here that was built up, torn down. Beecher Terrace was built up. Now it's going to be torn down and something new is going to take its place, right? And it's into that kind of long-term perspective, but you can combine both the archaeological and the historical work into potentially one single product. So that's definitely something to consider in terms of moving forward with actual decisions about the tangible outcome of this process.
Yeah, we separated out, to make this process easier and manageable. But additional materials would do exactly that, like the, it would take the built environment, the historical, maps, archaeology, ethnography, what's going on today, and put all that together and connect it in continuity.
The number of subjects you could deal with the whole of that history, from, you know, found city through slavery to justice and it's here. Hey, you got it all.
What's the next step since Darnell's got to be leaving?
And we are 1 minute away from time, appointed time for this discussion. So, I believe the next step is we're going to have a follow-up discussion and dig even deeper into might be reasonable.
The data recovery, so we'll have a meeting about the data recovery plan, and that is planned for, to check the calendar, but I think April 10th. And we're circulating an invitation for that soon, and that will dig deeply into the data recovery plan, which is the technical document that will discuss how this archaeological mitigation is pursued. Conversation will happen for the above ground mitigation effort, but about within a very short time frame, like 2 weeks. I thank everyone for their participation today. It was a very deep and fantastic conversation. I really appreciate that, especially thanks to Jay for all of the information he provided. Gina did put up on the screen, and it's still there now, the Vision Russell website. There's a specific place on that website where anyone who has comments or wants to provide information to the project can go. I strongly, anyone that interacts with folks, Martina, Darnell, out there in the neighborhood, please refer them to here, because this is an easy way to access us and a great way to provide us with any information. Go ahead.
Make a quick question. It's Betsy with Preservation Kentucky. I read through the programmatic agreement and may have overlooked it. Are there funds available for cultural heritage education / cultural tourism?
That has been addressed in the draft that we're circulating, but this next wave, will go into what are hopefully final revisions, is we're going to try to pin down answers to those questions.
Great, thank you.
More discussion to come. Of course, anybody that's on the consulting party's email list will get notified directly. We will also let you know if any of the dates change, as we're moving forward, too. So these are our best guesses, our estimates at the next time that we're going to get together. So for archaeology, look for something to happen on April 10th, probably in the same format if everybody is comfortable. I just want to ask the people on the phone, was this a comfortable way to have a meeting for you all?
I loved it. It was great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all.
All right, we'll talk to some of you in an hour. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Corn.